Live. We're streaming live. Oh, you know what? And I need to also hit the live for Telegram. So let me get you guys started here. So Dr. MacDonald, are you on Telegram?
No.
You're not even on Telegram. That's okay, but that we are going to go live right now on Telegram. So I'm doing that. And we are getting ready to start the classroom. This is a very important class, so make sure that you go beyond the algorithms and share and like and follow. We're going to start the record for BitChute and Odyssey, and also the podcast world that we have. Here we go. Today we have, I mean, it's going to be, I have no idea what's going to come out of today's conversation, but what I do know is that we're all going to be smarter, and we're going to learn some new truths that have been suppressed for a while now. And so fasten your seatbelt. It's time to learn and grow. And the best way to open your mind and be open to information is to dance. Here we go. It's time to dance and learn together.
The Lillian McDermott Show.
We love, we fear, bridges we burn, we make mistakes, then we live and learn. When life gets tough, and it seems like your best ain't good enough. If you're in need of hope, you know where I'll be right here, right here. And when you need a friend, you can count on me. I'll be right here, waiting for
you. This is the place you can always turn to when you need a friend. The Lillian McDermott Show. To reach out to Lillian, visit her on the web at whenyouneedafriend.com. Now let's all learn together. Here's Lillian McDermott.
Hello, my listening and viewing friend. It's so nice we can meet each other on the air on this beautiful, best day ever. And for those of you who are tuning into the classroom for the first time, please know I've been waiting for you. This is a safe place where you can go to when you need a friend. It is my commitment to provide natural ways to heal, and it is my mission to make awareness, responsibility, and truth a part of our everyday life. And I hope you, my listening and viewing friend, will feel empowered to embrace a new truth and live the life of your dreams. Well, I can go back 11 years when I started this show. Back then, it was a radio show. Now it's a classroom. Back then, if you would have told me today that I would believe the way I do, I would have said, nonsense, you're a quack. That's what I would think about me. But today, I look back at that person and I go, wow, look at how far we've come. And I can guarantee you that in the 11 years, this is the first time I've ever interviewed a pathologist. I can guarantee you of this. And one who can feel good enough to bop his head when it's time to dance. And so the journey of Dr. Alan MacDonald is one that I felt as soon as I heard Dr. Lee Cowden say his name, I said, I want to meet him. I need his email. We're going to reach out to him. And guess what? He said yes. And his many years of research, and I believe 40, for his job is to figure out the cause of death. What is the cause of death? What is the reason why he's got this body in front of him? But can you imagine every single body told him a story. And today he's connecting this today. So the title of this class, but it's going to go beyond it. It's the connection between Lyme, syphilis, and dementia. And I'm going to add mold to the mix. And since it is our sole purpose in life to give and receive love and knowledge, I am grateful that Dr. Alan MacDonald is here to do just that. Welcome to the classroom, Dr. MacDonald.
Thank you. I'm ready to speak to you about whatever you want to talk about.
Well, I already know this is going to be a delightful conversation. So as I said, your job is to be like a private investigator. You're looking at the body totally different than a doctor would, than a regular person would. So share a little bit about your background and what led you to the discoveries and the connections that you've made.
Well, actually, I am a medical doctor and I'm licensed to practice medicine in 5 states. So the MD part is part of the pathology part. And some people call us the doctor's doctor because we explain things that are difficult for anybody to understand. We make diagnoses and we check on the accuracy of diagnoses that are made to see that if something is missed, we can learn from it and do better. So what we are quality control officers, educational people, researchers, sometimes public relations people, communications with patients is what we do when we want to explain it to the patient as we do to the doctor. And I came into this after starting in medicine. I did some time at the Mayo Clinic and I had trained in Chicago and started in internal medicine. And it was a brutal every other night, all night situation where you are awake for almost 20 hours, you get a few hours sleep, you get back into the swing of things. And I couldn't go with sleep deprivation. So after that internship, I decided to go in something that would not require me to stay up all night and lose sleep. And it was the best decision of my life. So I entered pathology and I was trained at Columbia Presbyterian in New York. And I did a 5-year internship, residency. I became chief resident, went down to NYU Bellevue, and I was there to learn about the laboratory techniques and forensic medicine. I did some time at the medical examiner's office to learn about how medical examiners determine cause of death. So I had a broad base of education. And it's sort of noteworthy that when I was chief resident, I was assigned to do a lecture, a topic that I felt was in need of more discussion. And I chose syphilis. And I read the syphilis textbook and I described the complexities of syphilis. Syphilis in the heyday was a major public health problem. And it was said by Sir William Osler that if you know medicine, if you know syphilis, you know medicine. And if you don't know syphilis, you don't know a lot about medicine and you'll miss stuff. So at that time, it was necessary to understand that it could affect every part of the body, from the fingernails to the eyelashes, and there were no exceptions. Any part of the body could have been a target where syphilis could cause trouble. And after that focus, I went into community hospital pathology, and I was at a small hospital in Southampton, New York, where it was about 10 miles from where the tick that caused Lyme disease was discovered. So I was in Lyme disease central in the 1980s, and I became very educated by patients about the different ways that Lyme disease could present. And that just like syphilis, it could hit every different part of the body and it could hit every medical specialty. And I became very active in Lyme disease research at that time. And I went to a meeting in Vienna to present my discovery that some miscarriages in my hospital were due to Lyme disease killing the baby inside the uterus. And so I had dead babies to present. Remember, pathologists are not always about dead people. We're here for the living. Correct. But I presented my work in Vienna, and I had lots of images under the microscope of the Lyme disease spirochete, which looks exactly like the syphilis spirochete, inside the dead baby tissues. And I proved that the babies had died from infection. That helps the mother and father because that way they don't have to worry about a genetic problem that might recur in the next pregnancy that they try to attempt. And they don't have to worry about a genetic cause. It's an infection, you treat the infection, and the patient can go on without worrying about the thing happening again and again and again. At that conference, they were talking about the connections between Lyme disease and syphilis. And one of the things that syphilis is broken down into early, middle, and late stages. So early is close to the point of infection, and then mid is secondary syphilis. The primary is the earliest, and the secondary is midway through the disease if you don't treat it. And then very late syphilis is called tertiary syphilis. And they used that system to break down in Vienna in 1985, the category of stages of Lyme disease: primary, secondary, tertiary, right? And I thought, geez, I like that, because I mean, they're talking about Lyme disease and syphilis, and it makes sense to me to group it that way. And one of the presenters, when he mentioned the word tertiary, I hadn't thought about that, tertiary. I always thought tertiary syphilis. And for me, tertiary syphilis means that you have many, many problems, but one of the most vexing was dementia, syphilitic dementia. It's called general paresis. It's what killed Al Capone in the prison. He wouldn't allow his blood to be drawn. He was afraid of needles, so he never got treated for his syphilis. He died of syphilis. And he had dementia, and dementia and syphilis was exactly like the dementia of Alzheimer's disease. You know, spirochetes in the brain, and it's loss of personality, loss of ability to think, loss of ability to remember things, loss of ability to function. So late syphilis dementia was general paresis. And I sat in the chair and I said, you know, he's just mentioned tertiary. That means maybe Lyme disease could be just like syphilis and cause brain rot and cause dementia. And at that moment, I thought, gee, you know, everybody in the audience, there's about 500 of us there, they probably have the same idea. And I bet you that they're just itching to go home and see whether the Alzheimer cases that you have are anything like the dementia of syphilis. So I was ready to cancel the rest of the conference, grab a plane back to New York and get my hands on some Alzheimer brain tissue. Unfortunately, nobody else in the audience had that idea except me.
Wow.
My stress was unjustified, but I did, when I got back to New York, get my hands on Alzheimer brain tissue from a brain bank. And they sent me the brains from 4 patients who have died of Alzheimer's disease. And I decided that I would look at that and see if I could find spirochetes in Alzheimer brain. That's never been thought of before. And, you know, I was ready to do it. I had all the lab facilities. I had all the tools. I had a full hospital lab behind me, microbiology, all the pathology things, all the other things that we need to do, advanced research studies. I had $100,000 worth of equipment at my fingertips, so I didn't have to sign up for a grant to get it. I already had all the equipment and all the machines and all the skills. And I put some of this Alzheimer brain tissue into a culture medium, which allows spirochetes to grow. And I said, you know, it's a long shot, but, you know, maybe you can't grow the syphilis spirochete in any kind of liquid medium in the lab. It just doesn't cooperate. If you want it to grow, you have to put it into a rabbit testicle. And the rabbit's not happy about that, having it in his testicle. So that's the only way to get the spirochetes of syphilis to grow. But in Lyme disease, the spirochetes will grow if you add the right mixture of chemicals to the culture medium. And I had the culture medium. And I put the brain tissue in there, and I waited and I waited and I waited. And it took about 3, 4, 5 months before I started to see spirochetes growing from Alzheimer brain tissue in my liquid culture medium. And those spirochetes couldn't be syphilis because it doesn't grow in liquid. It had to be the Lyme spirochete. And I published those results in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1986. And I sent the paper in and I told them that I was very excited about it. And they looked at the pictures. I had pictures with ordinary stains and then special immunostains, and the most precise measurement for saying that the spirochetes that I had in the picture were actually Lyme spirochetes. And they wrote back to me that the problem that they had was that if they published that paper, and if I published it saying Borrelia spirochetes of Lyme disease in Alzheimer brain, that there would be a public health panic because every Lyme patient would think that they were going to have dementia. Mm-hmm. They said, we can't do this to the public because it's only 2 cases that you have to prove. So why don't we change the title and say, instead of Borrelia in Alzheimer brains, which is what it was, say Borrelia in dementia. And then that softens it a little bit. And they don't know that I'm making a connection between, Alzheimer dementia and Lyme disease, which is what I was really talking about. And one of the little stumbling blocks along the way was they sent my paper out to be reviewed by one of the leading Lyme experts in the day, Dr. Alan Steer. he described the disease. And so he wrote back and he said, this result, if true, would be of immense importance to medicine and to patient welfare. And then he put the word however.
Mhm.
Whenever you see the however, you know that the rest of the sentence is going to go completely reverse and slam you. So he said, however, the spirochetes in the pictures are the appearance of spirochetes growing in laboratory culture media. And I don't know how to reconcile that. What he was saying was that perhaps I had taken some Lyme spirochetes from somebody that didn't have Alzheimer's disease and grown them up and tried to pass them off as Lyme disease growing from Alzheimer brain.
Wow.
But the editors had the good judgment to say that they would publish it anyway and not talk about Alzheimer brains and just say that the Borrelia spirochetes and dementia were found in 2 patients. And so that was the first foray into publishing. Alzheimer's disease is a very, very political entity.
Well,
And Alzheimer's disease has strong political camps who argue that it has to be amyloid and that the amyloid is a bad actor. And then there's another camp in Alzheimer's research which says it has to be tau protein. And a tau protein is a protein that's normally found in brain cells in a healthy form, but it can become modified and become quote unquote toxic tau. So the argument between the amyloid and the tau community is like at a détente. And each one says that they're right and the other side is wrong. And it may be that both of them are wrong and it's actually an infection. That's where I come in. So when I try to publish my paper, which saying both of you are wrong, and drug money that has been, or drug research that has been funded with multi-million dollars to find Alzheimer remedies with amyloid type approaches has gone down in flames. Every single one of them has failed over the past 10 years to produce a good remedy for stopping Alzheimer's disease. And I think that the results say that the amyloid idea was interesting, but not productive. And you look elsewhere. And that's where we are today. We're looking elsewhere in this show for other sources of information and truth.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that history, because that's invaluable. So I want to go back because you mentioned the word spirochete, and that's what attracted me. That was what the conversation with Dr. Lee, we were in the M-Cube detox experience, and he was giving a talk. Somebody had, actually I record his bonus talk for the people who are watching it. And he had mentioned spirochetes, and that's when he had mentioned your name. And so I said, okay, let's talk about these spirochetes and what are they and how can you find them in your body? Because this is crucial information, because when you're saying, okay, syphilis. Now we know syphilis was treatable with antibiotic, right? Yes,
it was. It was supposed to be eradicated after World War II when penicillin was released to the civilian population. It had done a lot of good things for the military, and it became available after World War II. And at that point, people who were treated, who had syphilis that hadn't responded to anything else, treated with penicillin, did very, very, very well. And so it was hoped that that would cure syphilis and erase it from the face of the earth. And for a long time, it seemed like they were maybe going to get there. And then it was shown that it doesn't cure all forms of syphilis. Late forms, it doesn't cure. But it can cure the primary forms, and it can cure other things. And, penicillin is an antibiotic which stops the cell of the bacteria, the bug, the microbe, from dividing. It attacks the cell wall, and it destroys the cell by attacking the cell wall. So it's a cell wall active antibiotic. Very good very good medicine.
And I don't know if you have been in the Lyme world, then you know Dr. Richard Horowitz, who is a friend of the classroom too. He's been having great results with his Lyme patients with high doses of something dapsone or something.
Yes, dapsone is a medicine that's used to treat leprosy. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Dapsone is numero uno in treating leprosy worldwide. Dapsone is a very effective medication for leprosy.
So could leprosy also be attached to
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Just know that it works. It's cheap. It's safe. It can be used in the tropics or in places where you don't have high-tech medicine. It can be used where you do have high-tech medicine. It's an anti-leprosy medicine that has been recruited to treat chronic Lyme disease. It's not used to treat acute. It's only used to treat chronic, the people who have not done well. You treat chronic Lyme disease early enough, you can hope that 80% of your patients will get better with antibiotic therapy properly given over a proper time. It may be a year of antibiotics.
Wow.
But even after a year of antibiotics, of that 100%, 80% will do better and 20% won't do well at all. So there's a 20% failure rate, which is acknowledged up front for people who have chronic Lyme disease. And Lyme in the brain causing dementia is a chronic Lyme condition.
Mm.
So if you're going to treat it, you're going to be up for a year or more of antibiotic therapy, and probably more.
And I can't imagine I mean, I would think that the body would need to be rebuilt after that.
They give it in pulses. So you get the medicine, then you rest, then no medicine is given, then you get the medicine again. It's called pulses. So pulses is when you get the medicine, and then resting period is when you're resting between, and you get, rebuild the microbiome, the microbes in the body. You have a need for healthy bacteria, healthy microbes to make your body work properly.
Nice.
And if you kill everything, then you're not going to do yourself a favor. You've got to let the healthy ones come back.
Yes.
Microbes are not the enemy. Only the bad microbes are the enemy. Otherwise, we depend enormously on healthy microbes to have a healthy life.
So I want to go back to spirochetes, because let's explain what a spirochete is for all. Maybe this is the first time they're hearing the word spirochete. Maybe this is the first time they're even making this connection. Maybe this is the first time they've met you.
Yes.
I know that Dr. Lee has talked about spirochetes and how you can find them in the body. And I want to discuss that, because everybody who's paying attention right now is going to want to take some notes or watch this and share this with all their friends over and over and over again. So share a little bit about a spirochete, and why is that something that you paid attention to?
Okay, well, you think of the basic structure of microbes, bacteria, and you can think of the Morse code. You have the dots and the dashes, okay? So that the ones that are dots are like staphylococcal spirochetes and streptococcal spirochetes. They're small little rounded dot-like, at the period at the end of the sentence is a dot. That's the size of that kind of a microbe. The dash in Morse code is a longer, cylinder-like structure. That's called a bacillary form. And a lot of microbes in the gut, like E. coli, are like the dash form in the Morse code. It's elongated. Neither of them have any spirals or corkscrew turns or sine wave morphology. If you have a spiral form, it looks like a corkscrew at the end of a corkscrew, to pull out the cork in the bottle. And that is a very easy to understand difference between the shape of spirochetes. All spirochetes have a spiral form, but that's not the only form they can have. They are sneaky. And we used to call syphilis Sneaky Pete the spirochete, because it could do sneaky things, all right? And so it could do many, many things to deceive the people who have only a very, very basic idea of it has to be a corkscrew. Well, if it's a corkscrew, it can't be. That's wrong. You can have spirochetes that are legitimate, that are not spiral or corkscrew shaped. But basic stuff, the kindergarten version of spirochetes is that they look like a corkscrew. The college-educated version of that is that they can look like many other forms. They can break up into little dots. They can become straight like the bacillary form of E. coli, and they can become cystic and like a bag of fluid, and they can have biofilm community. So they have many, many different ways to adapt to environmental situations which are unfriendly to them. And they use those other forms to have some protection and keep them alive. And then when they're back in a resting state, they can form the spiral again. But the idea of no spiral, no spirochete, no Lyme disease, no syphilis is doomed to failure because it's not true. It's just too basic. It's a kindergarten view.
Okay, so when you are talking about the spirochete, there's those little worms or whatever you want to call them.
No, they're
whether
not worms. They're
not-
just
they're
corkscrew.
microbes. Okay.
Corkscrew, yeah. They're bigger than
but-
worms.
They're bigger than worms.
Yes.
Okay, so they're.
I mean,
so-
worms are bigger than spirochetes. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Worms are bigger than spirochetes.
Yeah, so
There we
they're
are.
smaller.
Right.
Okay, so smaller, but they're an organism. They're a microbe, an organism
Right,
that is
right,
in our
yes.
body. And so then how do they make it to the brain? Because that's what caught my attention, that these spirochetes may start one place, but then they end up in the brain. They may start as syphilis and then they end up in the brain. Next thing you know, they're calling it dementia or Parkinson's.
Well,
or-
all right. Okay. Well, let's say that we want to get from point A to point B, and you can either use direct invasion. For instance, if there were a way to put a syringe full of spirochetes into the brain fluid and then inject it, you could get an infection that way. Unfortunately, infections don't happen that way. That we don't inject people with syringes.
Mhm.
You could take a Greyhound bus, but unfortunately, Greyhound doesn't service any other areas of the body at all. So you can't take the bus, right? So you have to go through the blood. And spirochetes move in the blood. Actually, the first point in the body where spirochetes cause trouble is that after they exit from the mouth of the tick into the skin, they get into the blood. And once they're in the blood, they can get to any point in the body. They can get to the eye, the brain, the skin, the kidney, the liver, the lung, the unborn fetus. Once it's in the blood, it can go anywhere it pleases. And so it has to get to the brain by going through the blood. Now, there's something called the blood-brain barrier,
Mhm.
and the body is protected against a number of conditions because there is a blood-brain barrier, and nature has set it up that way. Spirochetes have the ability to drill through the vessels and puncture a hole in the capillary and get into any space they want.
Wow.
They're like corkscrews. They can go in and they can bore their way in and get into the fluid of the brain. They can also, once they're in the fluid of the brain, they can go into the individual cells and bore a hole in the individual cells and get into the cytoplasm. And they can even bore a hole and get into the nucleus of the cell. Once the spirochetes get into the cells, you're in trouble because it's easy to treat infections in the blood, but it is very difficult to treat infections inside of cells, inside of tissue sites. It's hiding. It's like in a sanctuary site.
Mhm.
And it can stay there for 20 years and live very happily. And, over the time, do very little or do a lot of damage. And that's where syphilis comes in. Not all syphilis in the brain cause dementia. Only 10% of syphilis in the brain cause dementia. There were other types of syphilis in the brain that were called benign type syphilis of the brain. So it's not all bad news. And the difference between the bad outcome, dementia, and the okay outcome that you're able to function, but you still have the infection, is huge. And you have to be able to understand that that's a part of the spectrum of syphilis, and that's part of the spectrum of Lyme. Not everybody with Lyme disease who has chronic infection has equal bad disease symptoms. Some people have very severe symptoms. Some people have almost no symptoms. Some people have very few symptoms, and then it flares up, and then they have bad symptoms, and then it calms down, and then they have a quiet period. So it's looking at the model of syphilis and understanding that everything that we learned from syphilis, we learned from study of patients over 500 years. The last area of syphilis that was permitted by the political medical establishment was syphilis causing dementia. They fought like hell to keep that from being a real entity. And there was a doctor in New York called Hideo Noguchi, who was the person who proved by studying autopsy brains that he could find the syphilis spirochete in the autopsy brains of people who died with syphilitic dementia. And after he did that and published his pictures, all of the opposition melted. And they finally accepted syphilis. It was the last area of syphilis to be accepted after 500 years of study, to be accepted by the medical profession. That shows that the medical profession can be stubborn. And the medical profession can say, well, I didn't learn about that when I was in medical school, so it can't be true. You don't walk away from a doctor like that. You run away from a doctor like that, because when you stop learning in medicine, then you can only coast one way, and that's downhill. And in order to keep them up in medicine, you have to do continuing education like you're doing with your community. Medicine requires continuing education to keep up with stuff and to be effective. If you don't know about it, you can't diagnose it. If you don't diagnose it, you can't treat it. And if you can't treat it, you shouldn't be in that area of medicine. If you can't diagnose it and can't treat it, find another thing. Become a golf pro. Do something else, but don't dabble in medicine. Keep up. That's
great advice. Great advice, Dr. MacDonald. Okay, so for those of you who are tuning in, just know that we will do a Q&A. There may be a chance that this class will not be able to stay in YouTube or Facebook, but you will definitely find it on Odyssey and BitChute. So go to whenyouneedafriend.com, check out the website, make sure you subscribe so that you know all of Dr. MacDonald's information, because he is in the website and or the blog. And so that is why you should subscribe. You will also get the audio version once you've subscribed to the classroom, and make sure that you check out all my social media, like and follow, and please share this, because this is the way this information is being currently suppressed. And so the best way that we can help the classroom grow, one of the best way, another one is to be a contributor to becoming an enrolled student in the classroom. But one of the best ways that you can help is to share, to like, to follow, because that will go beyond the algorithms. Whatever they're trying to do to the classroom, you can supersede it by, it's like you're the epigenetics of this classroom. So make sure that you share this with all your friends. Let people know that there may be a test that you can take to see if this spirochetes are in your body. And so so I want to encourage you to go check out my sponsors, check out my Shop Now bag, check out the M-Cube Detox experience. That's how I found out about Dr. MacDonald, is because Dr. Lee Cowden was talking about spirochetes and how people with mold, metals, and microbes have these spirochetes as well in their body and how it affects us. So we're learning so much more, and you can join at any time. It's a 12-week course. We're on our 8th week, but even if we're done, you can still join us on our Tuesday nights, or you can join us by watching the recordings. But this is incredible information, Dr. MacDonald, and so yes, absolutely. And so I want to encourage all of you to check out the conversation today at whenyouneedafriend.com or on my social media, share it. Also, if you decide that you want to become an enrolled student in the classroom, you can be helping out, bringing more people into the classroom and helping us grow even more. Today, we have Dr. Alan MacDonald, and the website that I have is Alzheimer's Borreliosis.net. Is that the one you want us to promote, or is there another one?
Well, yes, that has the most information. I have a smaller one too, but that one's the one that has a lot of the data, the pictures, and if you want to read the whole paper, it's like swimming through wet cement because it's very dense, but you can read the whole paper in medical version.
Yeah, but you know what? This is the best way we can become our own MD, our own medical detective, our own, ownership of our own life, is to say, you know what, doctor, I'm being a little forgetful. I'm experiencing these symptoms. How can we treat this? How can we, first of all, confirm? Because Dr. Lee Cowden talked about a spinal tap or other things that we can do. What are some of the things that we can do to confirm if the dementia you have isn't caused by spirochete or syphilis or Lyme or whatever? What can we do to test?
Well, right now the acid test is to do an after-death examination of the brain. That doesn't really work for people who want to have benefit during their lifetime. But that's the way that you prove it to the medical establishment, is to say that under the microscope, in the area where Alzheimer's disease is known to cause trouble, there also do I see spirochetes going into the tissue and between the cells, and actually going inside the cells and killing the nerve from the inside out. And so we can show that those are, under the microscope, the direct evidence that you have. It's much better than antibodies and any of your blood or spinal fluid. It's a direct identification of the bad guy, the microbe, in the tissue at the site of disease. Now, if I find that somebody has it in their liver and they also have Alzheimer's disease, I wouldn't be able to say for sure that the one in the liver is actually also in the brain, because it can selectively choose liver, or it can selectively choose heart and not go to the brain. So in order to prove that the brain is being damaged, you must find it in the brain. Now, in the days of syphilis, when they had many patients in the ward at some of the major medical institutions, they would have morning brain biopsy rounds, where they would put a little Novocaine into the skin over the eyebrow, and then they would get a drill and they would go into the skull, and then put a little needle into the brain and pull out some of the brain tissue and look and see if they could find the syphilis spirochetes in the brain tissue in a living patient. Believe it or not, that was safe. Nobody died from it. And it was able to prove in those cases who wanted to participate in that study that during life, you could find the syphilis spirochete in the brain in people who had general paresis. Now we don't do that sort of thing, but it's something that could be done. It was safe and effective back in the early days of the last century, and it's something that could be done. You can also have a neurosurgeon go in and do a neurosurgical under general anesthesia, drill a hole, and then put the needle in and get some brain tissue out, and then see what's in the brain tissue itself. That's what's required for proof for the skeptics. And we have a lot of medical people who need to be convinced with that kind of proof to accept the idea that the public health problem of dementia, which we call Alzheimer's disease, could have a big chunk due to infection or due to other sorts of things. So we could chunk out the infection and then say, all right, the rest of it is other things that we can't do anything about. Maybe it's a genetic thing. Unfortunately, genetic causes of Alzheimer's disease are very limited and don't help most of the public who have sporadic forms of Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is public health issue #1 in our country today, and worldwide too. And so loss of years of useful life and all the things that come with Alzheimer's. I mean, if you've had a relative who died from it, it's a terrible disease. You know, you lose pieces of the person every day. And then there's no memory at all. And then you just have a person who can't feed themselves and is incontinent of urine and stool and can't walk and is sit in the recliner chair and can't even talk or interact with you. It's a terrible disease. Yeah. And it's something that if there is an infection in any of those people, let's say it's only 10%, those 10% deserve the opportunity to get an antibiotic so that we can hope for a reversal or a cure. It's not fair to say that under all circumstances, infection is impossible. That's not scientifically justified, and it's not proven with the research that I've done in the last 40 years. I've proven that infection is justified. The question is, what percentage of all of the Alzheimer's cases or all the dementia cases have an infection evidence at autopsy in the brain where I can take the picture and show the spirochetes to the skeptics? Well, of all the Alzheimer brains I've used from brain banks at Harvard and Columbia and other places around the world, I have yet to find a case of Alzheimer's disease in those brain banks that does not have Borrelia spirochetes in the brain. So I need to be convinced that the number is not a trivial number, but it's a high number. Now, how many brains can I look at in my lifetime? Well, not too many. I want to train people to do my technique. And not a lot of people are knocking on my door and saying, well, you have the best techniques. Can I, use them? Of course you can. I'll give you the reagents. I'll give you the techniques. I'll give you the recipes. I'll give you everything. But they don't knock on the door because they don't feel that my work is, what would you call it? trustworthy?
Well, I tell you what, I have it in good authority with Dr. Lee Cowden. When he mentioned your name, I did some research myself because I research everybody that comes into the classroom.
Mhm.
But just the fact that you're keeping company with Dr. Lee Cowden shows me that you've convinced him of your work, and that is a lot easier for me to take that next step and invite you to come into the classroom. I have so much questions for you because, we're talking about just recently there's a correlation between, let me ask the question because I don't want to make a statement, but is there a correlation between syphilis and schizophrenia?
There are many personality disorders that could happen. And so everything in the medical textbook could be linked one way or the other to a form of syphilis that would happen in some patients, but not all patients.
Okay.
So you had to have an open mind. You had to read the textbook. And there was so much information in the textbook, they used to call it the green monster because there was so much information to absorb. There are so many rules and then exceptions to rules and then modifications and little finesses where you'd have part of the question answered yes and part of the question answered no. I mean, if you look at babies, dead babies, syphilis was a major killer of babies, major killers in the heyday, stillborns. And that's why when I got married, we had to have a blood test. What was the blood test for? Syphilis.
I remember that.
Why was the blood test ordered? Because you couldn't get a marriage license without getting the blood test for syphilis negative, because you didn't want to have a baby that died from your union from syphilis that was transmitted to the baby either from mother or father. That was public health law number one. And that sort of dropped off the map in the 1970s and they stopped doing it. Now we might offer a blood test for Lyme disease, because Lyme disease can kill babies equally as syphilis could kill babies in the utero. And you can have stillborn or miscarriages or babies that are born with infections that are not fully developed, and then they go on to have autism in their early years, or have other severe psychiatric disorders, or commit suicide because they had an infection that they acquired as an in utero baby, and then it developed and flourished in their younger years or in their adolescent years. So it's very, very complex, but everything is open for consideration. Sudden infant death. What is sudden infant death? That's a death where the baby looks very healthy, and at 4 months, you go into the nursery and the baby's dead, and they didn't strangle in the crib. They're just lying in the bed, peaceful and dead. No illness before that. Sudden infant death. I found Lyme disease spirochetes in the brains of 2 of 10 sudden infant death babies. But that was good news for the parents because they don't have to worry about having some terrible genetic problem for the next baby, do they?
Sure.
Right? So there's lots of payoff for doing this kind of research and keeping an open mind and using the lessons of syphilis to develop better ideas about how to take care of people now in the era of Lyme disease, when Lyme disease is a public health issue and syphilis is still there. They say it was forgotten but not gone. Sometimes at funerals they say, oh, he's gone but not forgotten. Well, syphilis is forgotten but not gone. Right? It's still there and it's coming back big time.
Wow. And you don't even hear it. It used to be when I was growing up that syphilis was like the thing that you needed to worry about and all of that.
Right.
Now it's a totally different world. So let me go back a little further then. And by the way, if you guys have any questions, type in your questions, put a Q on there, type your question down, and we'll address it in the Teacher's Pet Corner. So I just read an article that talked about when a cat scratched you, those microbes could cause schizophrenia. So is that the same?
The cat scratch situation is very complicated because there are degrees of illness that you can have a very large lymph node in your armpit, and that's called cat scratch disease, a microbe called Bartonella. And it's a special kind of infection. But cat scratch disease in somebody who's immunocompromised can cause all kinds of terrible things. Just another sidebar. Men who have sex with men are the leading population where syphilis is coming back in big, big amounts. And that's
Wow.
because they don't use barrier protection, and syphilis is there. And the syphilis in the men who have sex with men community is a growing public health issue for syphilis in this time in our culture. Now, you can't give blood to a blood bank and be a blood donor if you ever had syphilis, right? History of syphilis, goodbye. We won't take your blood. Even if you had a complete cure, because they overdo the rule to protect against the possibility that there's still some spirochetes in the blood, that if you take those units and then give it to a leukemic patient, they could get a very raging infection with whatever's in that blood. So they were very, very particular about blood donation. You can see how Lyme disease is spilling over into the syphilis, and you really can't tell where the syphilis beginning and end is separate from the Lyme disease beginning and end. It's like the same gamish.
Mhm.
Gamish is an Irish word, which I learned from my Yiddish classmates in New York, and it's a gamish. And that's a big mixture. And Lyme disease is a big troublemaker.
Well, it's like my mind is going so many different places, because just this information alone, you knew we would fill up an hour. There's so much more that Dr. MacDonald knows that we need to learn. So I'm hoping that he'll come back into the classroom to share more, because we only have like 10 minutes of this series. But if you can type in a Q, write your question down, we'll answer your questions before the end, before we go. Okay, so with that in mind, let's say syphilis is now gone. That's, we don't think about syphilis anymore. Could they have renamed syphilis to Lyme? Could they have renamed syphilis to HIV, Epstein-Barr? Could they have renamed syphilis to, what? Can they rename it?
No, syphilis is
It's its own.
it's already codified and cut in stone. All right,
Okay.
so syphilis will never be anything else but syphilis. It is not gone.
It's not
It is
gone.
not gone. It is coming back in select communities in this world right now. There's actually a growing population of women who have babies with congenital syphilis. So the
How could that
heterosexual
be?
population, we have syphilis, and in the men who have sex with men population, we have syphilis. And in each of those communities, it's causing public health problems. If you have syphilis on top of another infection, like if Epstein-Barr, and then you get syphilis, you're going to have a rougher time because your antibodies are not going to be as effective. If you have it in other situations where you're taking chemotherapy for cancer, you're going to have a rougher time with it. But syphilis will always be syphilis. It'll never change.
How
And
do you
Lyme
test-
disease will always be Lyme disease, and they're
Okay.
separate. They're separate.
So how do you test for syphilis? Can you do a blood test? How can we
Yeah, so-
all be responsible? All
Yes.
of us get tested just to see where to go from there.
Well, syphilis is always diagnosed with a blood test, and the blood tests are available in any public health laboratory, and they're available in all the commercial labs. So you can get a blood test for syphilis, and there are two different types of testing, but they're very time tested. They all work, and sometimes you use test A to get a pathway to test B. But in any event, you can get a blood test for syphilis. And that's becoming important now. And it's
I'd
as
say.
it was back in the days when it was a public health scourge. It's now coming back in a big way in public health medicine. So it's not gone. It's maybe forgotten, but it's not gone.
So one of the reasons why this caught my eye is both my parents have dementia. My mom's 87, my dad's 92.
Oh, I'm
my
sorry
mom-
to hear that.
Yeah. And when you talk about it, when I'm with my mom and my dad, I'm in the moment. I am in the moment with them, and I
Yeah.
live there. I live through them.
Mhm.
And that way, there's no need to correct. There's no need. I live whatever they see, whatever she speaks of. That is what my response is. But I wonder, would I be able to test my parents' blood to see if they have syphilis? Is that possible?
Well, you could, and there's no reason why you couldn't. The doctor just writes a checkoff box and has that. But you could also evaluate them for the other spirochetal infection, which can cause dementia, which is Lyme disease infection. Now, there are cases where people who started out with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease were found with testing to not progress to dementia, right? So you have Lyme disease that doesn't go on to dementia. And then you have people who started out with dementia, it looks like Alzheimer's disease, and it says, like Chris Christopherson, it was Alzheimer's disease, wasn't it? Until they diagnosed him with Lyme disease and gave him antibiotics, and he's back on the tour because he got cured, right? So you can go backwards or you can go forwards. And the tests are available, they're cheap, and they're available. Unfortunately, in Lyme disease, the testing with the antibodies is not as helpful as the testing for antibodies in syphilis. That's kind of a paradox. And syphilis, there were issues where they would say, well, you could have a false positive. Yeah, you could, but most of the positives are true positives in syphilis. In Lyme disease, the argument is, well, you can have a positive and it's probably just a false positive. It doesn't really mean anything in the testing. And then you can have Lyme disease and have no antibodies at all, and then you're negative, and then there's no positive to discuss. So there's all kinds of different permutations. I have come up with a test which works in a research setting where I look at the blood in people who have the symptoms of late Lyme disease, but who have no antibodies in their blood. And I can find in some of those patients that there's little spirochetes swimming in the blood.
Now,
and the reason that the antibody test is negative is that the spirochetes have pulled the antibody that was in the blood in a soluble phase onto the surface of the spirochete. The antibody is supposed to do that, right? It's supposed to bind to the bug. And because it's pulled out, and there's so many of them, that's pulled out all that antibody, there's nothing left in the blood to come up with a blood test. So I see antibody-coated spirochetes in late Lyme disease patients, and I'm doing a study right now to look at that. And that could also be expanded to look at Alzheimer patients to see if they have antibody-coated spirochetes in their blood, which don't belong there, and Lewy body patients, because I found spirochetes of Lyme disease and Lewy body dementia too. And the frontotemporal dementia, they found them in frontotemporal dementia too. So it depends on what type of dementia you're talking about, but all types of dementia are fair game for looking at the possibility that some of that could be infection. Every single subcategory of dementia is fair game. Even Parkinson's disease is fair game. And there are cases where Parkinson's patients have been shown to have spirochetes in their brain at autopsy. So it's all like syphilis. Syphilis could do many different things. Not everybody got everything. Not everybody got the same bad thing. Some people got bad thing number 1 and bad thing number 2 and bad thing number 3, and they don't overlap. Some people had spinal cord only syphilis. To me, that could be motor neuron disease, Lou Gehrig's disease. We've had cases where Lou Gehrig's disease is a manifestation of chronic Lyme infection. Does that make your head spin? Makes my head spin.
I am just thrilled because to find this information, it puts us in now an ownership position. All of us who are listening and who will listen for as long as this class stays on the internet, or you can go to my website. As long as this on there, there's hope that people can say, because I know it was Jacob Teitelbaum that came on to my show and said, only 70%, of the people that are diagnosed with dementia, Alzheimer dementia, only 30% have it, like the true real dementia. And then he goes, but there's 70% that have something else.
Right.
What's that something else? And this is like a piece of the puzzle for me. This is a piece of a puzzle that gives hope.
Nobody has all the puzzles solved. That's why we are still able to do research. And when you stop asking a question, well, what about, what if, could it be? When you stop asking the could it be question, you stop learning. And when you stop learning, you should get out of medicine and do something else, like play pro golf or pro baseball, or do windsurfing. But don't practice medicine if you stop learning, because you're not doing the patients you're responsible for any favors. The practice of medicine is a privilege. And if you don't keep up, the privilege to practice medicine can be withdrawn. Your medical degree can be nullified by bad practice. by failing to do the right thing. You can lose your right to practice medicine if you don't keep up and do a good job with your patients.
Yeah.
And that's why medical boards are there.
Yeah,
Think about it.
unfortunately, nowadays in today's environment, a lot of good doctors that are trying to do the right things are being suppressed, and
That's the other side. That's the weaponizing.
yeah,
That's using medical boards to weaponize against doctors who dare to ask and answer questions which are not in the textbooks. That's not good either.
yeah.
So you can weaponize the medical boards, or you can use the medical boards to clean house. And they do a little bit of each.
Well, I tell you what, I am so grateful. I don't have to worry about losing my MD, because I don't. My MD is for medical detective. That's it.
Yeah.
And if they want to take away my certified coaching certificate, they can take it out. And so I'm spreading the word. You have a strong advocate here, and I want all this information to go out. We're going to continue our conversation because we're about a minute left. If not, the music's going to start soon, but we got about a minute left. And so I want you guys to know that we're going to have a Teacher's Pet Corner. So for those of you who are listening on podcast that are watching later on, maybe YouTube or Facebook has removed this, just know you can find us on BitChute and Odyssey. Dr. Alan MacDonald, thank you so much for this information. We're going to continue speaking. So all of you who are watching, make sure you put in your cues, write your questions, and we'll ask your questions after the class today. And please remember, we'll be right here waiting for you worldwide at whenyouneedafriend.com. This is Lillian McDermott and Dr. Alan MacDonald wishing you love, peace, joy, and unexpected abundance. Make it the best day ever.
The opinions and advice expressed on the Lillian McDermott radio show are intended for the individual callers and guests on the program and are presented to our wider audience solely for general educational purposes. Please act responsibly and consult personally with your own medical, psychological, or nutritional expert before taking any steps to improve your life.
I have stopped sending shows to people because, some people just don't want to know this information. They'd rather, they don't think this is even possible. The what if, like if this is possible, then the medical profession would come out with this and they would research it and they want the best for you. But I have discovered in my years of interviewing that it isn't so. It isn't so. There's a higher power. And I believe in the higher power, but there is a power that is trying to suppress this information, and it is very evil. And there was a research that I had, something that I knew, and maybe you did say it, but you said it in a different way. You were talking about, I was doing the research that you were saying that the testing for Lyme is inadequate, that it's total blood. You should look at the total blood in order. Can you explain that a little bit more? So for people that have gone and they think they have Lyme, they have the symptoms of Lyme, but they're being told they don't have Lyme.
Well, right now, the antibody tests for Lyme disease are the beginning and the end for doctors who want to make things simple. Now, if you are early in the disease and you have the clinical features, you probably don't need a blood test because it takes a while for the blood antibodies to form. If you're in the middle part of your disease, the antibodies still may not be high enough to be detected at a high enough level for the lab to say, oh, that's high enough. It's like if it's halfway there, it's not good enough. It's all the way to the cutoff, then it's good. And then if you're way out at the end of the disease, you may either have very high antibody levels, or you may have antibody levels that have gone down into the normal range and are not detectable. So negative results in antibody testing are never, ever diagnostic. Negative results do not count. Unfortunately, people say, well, the CDC says that if you're not positive, then you must be negative. That's the type of logic that is not logical, because you're allowed to have diseases and not have antibodies in your blood to those diseases. Tuberculosis is an example. There are no antibodies to tuberculosis that you can detect with a blood test, right? You identify it by seeing the bug in the tissue. And you do a biopsy. So with Lyme disease, you can do a biopsy and find that the bug is in the tissue. But what I've come up with is a blood test in the research phase now where the spirochetes in the blood, let me see if I got, oh yes, here we go. Here's the spirochete in the blood. And it's going to be available for study. But if the spirochete meets its antibody, the antibody binds to the surface of the spirochete, so you can't see it anymore. See, this is spirochete, there's the antibody that's bound to it. Now, every bit of that white sign, which is the antibody bound to the surface of the spirochete, used to be in solution in the blood. And only antibodies that are in solution can be detected with current tests right now. If it's bound to a solid surface, it's invisible because there's nothing left in the solution phase, right?
Mm-hmm.
So by finding antibody-coated spirochetes in people who have negative blood test serology, I've come up with a test which gets around that problem because I see the spirochetes, that's proof of the disease. And I also see that they've covered themselves with antibody. And that explains why everything that they bound to their surface is taken out of solution and is not available for the machine to see. The machine can only see what's in solution. This machine right here can see it under the microscope. And the human brain is a better machine than an ELISA machine.
I agree.
100% of the time. So if you can find the bug, it's called direct identification. You got the diagnosis. You don't need an antibody in the blood. And by contrast, if you want to believe that antibodies in blood eliminate the possibility of active infection, you need to go back to medical school. Remember, tuberculosis doesn't have any antibodies in the blood. You can die of it with a you'll never find antibodies in the blood in tuberculosis. Lots of diseases don't have antibodies in blood. We've been spoiled in the last 40 years and leaning on antibodies in blood as a diagnostic crutch. And it's a bad crutch. It's crippling. It's a crippling crutch. How do you like that? Antibodies in blood are a crippling crutch.
So how can we have access to your
Well, only I do it
machine?
right now. Only I do it now. But I have some studies undergoing where I've contacted people who have chronic symptoms and that they think the physician thinks it's chronic Lyme, but the antibody test in blood is negative. So they send me the blood and I do it my test, and I can see the antibody-coated spirochetes. Once I see them, they've got their answer. The problem is still in the blood. That's all they need to do. I send a picture of the spirochete in the blood so they can look, they can show it to the patient. This is what you have in your blood. McDonald found spirochetes in your blood.
Just like a little vacation shot. Hey, I'm here.
It's not made up. This is your spirochete. You own it, right? And it owns you too.
And if there's one, there's more.
Oh yeah, because in order to see one spirochete in a microscopic field of view, you have to have 10,000 spirochetes in a larger volume of blood. It's a milliliter of blood, a cc of blood, right? And so that's 100,000 of them. So if you have a lesser number, you will not be able to see it as easily, but you can still see it if you keep looking.
Okay, so because I am studying about mold, metals, and microbes, I have to ask the question. The way that I'm getting rid of the mycotoxins in my body is I'm starving it from all the sugar or carbs and, all the vinegar or whatever it is. I'm starving it. Plus I'm doing binders, plus I'm doing antifungals. So if you have a spirochete or spirochetes in your body, we're not even talking about the brain. We're just talking about the body now. Yeah. Is it possible to starve the spirochetes? No. And the only way to kill them is through antibiotics?
Antibiotics are something that is a first cousin to antibiotics. There are some things that can kill spirochetes that are not strictly antibiotics, but are like antibiotics. Like one of them is disulfiram. You've probably heard about that. That's the anti-abuse disulfiram medicine that Dr. Ligner has defined. It's something it's given to people who want to get off the alcoholism habit. And when you take alcohol with disulfiram, you get this terrible flushing and it causes, patients to feel terrible. They found that disulfiram, for some unknown reason, also can kill spirochetes. It's not supposed to, but it does.
That's great news, though. That's great news.
That is good news. So there are other things out there. There are nutraceuticals and there are natural things that can kill spirochetes. They're not quote unquote antibiotics. Remember,
Right.
antibiotics came from what? Mold.
Mold. I learned that in the MQ detox experience.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
Spirochetes. Well, you know, Alexander Fleming, what happened? You left the plates a little too long, and you know, then the mold grew on the plate, and then the bugs couldn't go into the area where the mold was, and around the mold there was still no growth, and so there's got to be something in there, right? Alexander Fleming, Nobel Prize, right? Penicillin.
Yeah.
Clinical observation, accidental. You know,
Isn't it funny?
I bet you, you know, his docs at the time really thought, well, he's kind of a hokey kind of guy. I'm not sure I'd trust him, you know, or even x-rays, you know, x-rays were kind of an unexpected finding too. EKGs weren't trusted for a long time in medicine because they didn't have any training in it. A lot of the things now which are cutting edge medical diagnostic devices were not welcomed with open arms by the medical community when they came into being. Because the medical community is very, 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 very conservative. It's like the ship, you know, if you have to turn right rudder or hit the, you know, the Titanic and you hit the iceberg, they couldn't turn the ship fast enough. And so they, you know, opened up and they went down.
Mm-hmm.
Medicine does not do adroit right and left turns to avoid hitting icebergs. They don't. They need sometimes to wash out in several generations, and you know, the doctors who are now alive and in power, their descendants or the descendants of, you know, other generations will finally come to understand that a new development is useful in medicine, trustworthy, and safe. Right?
Yeah. In my
it takes
opinion,
a while. It takes a while to wash out some of these biases.
Yeah. In my opinion, however, what the medical or what would happen is that they would create a pill to help you hit the iceberg and not feel the pain, and continue to hit the iceberg and take the medication so that you don't feel the pain, and hit the iceberg again and take the medication. That's what I see as the pattern here, is that you take the medication so that you can continue living the lifestyle that you are. So instead of addressing the root cause. So it would be great if somebody would wake up, you know, like I call it the white coat trance, you know, where we hear and obey. And so we need to stop and say, you know what, not my body, not my body. So we have some questions, and this is great information. And okay, if people cannot give blood if they had syphilis, can they give blood if they had the jab? Isn't the blood tainted as well? And this may put us in a place where if you can answer this question without using any of the words that will get me thrown out, I don't know if you even want to address this.
Well, you know, vaccinations, immunizations, that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
And that is one of the safest entities in medicine, you know, without any kind of, that's a full stop. I mean, childhood diseases were controlled and eliminated by virtue of vaccination. So it's child abuse to not give your children proper vaccinations. Now, the jab is the COVID series of things, which is the special vaccine, which I think it is safe and effective. I mean, I've gotten every version and I've gotten all my boosters. So in order to be able to practice medicine in a hospital setting, going from all the time that I was in hospital practice, when an immunization came along, like for hepatitis B and hepatitis C and all that sort of, even though some of the hepatitis B came early from AIDS patients' blood, it was determined to be safe and effective, so we got it. And if we didn't want to get it, we'd be out of a job, because you couldn't be unvaccinated in a hospital setting. So I believe in immunizations. Now, I understand people have special questions about individual vaccines, and you know, the vaccine for Lyme disease, I don't think is safe and effective. I don't think it harms you, but I don't think it works. That's going to be reintroduced, but I think, you know, the bug is constantly changing its DNA, so you can't, you know, with a moving target succeed. The influenza virus changes its DNA every year, so what do you need? If you want a new flu shot, you get the new flu shot rather than last year's flu shot over again, right? So you have to continually challenge your body. So there's lots of points where people can disagree about whether vaccines are okay for me or my child. But I think by and large, vaccines have proven to be a major public health boon in medical care.
Okay.
And, you know, some people have bad outcomes, but then there's bad outcomes to taking aspirin. You can die from taking an aspirin too.
Yeah.
So you can't make it 100% for everybody. People decide what their tolerance for risk is, and people can decide, and you have freedom of choice.
And we've done enough classes here that people know how I believe on this, and so everybody's got to make their own decision, and hopefully they'll make the right decision for them. So let me see. So that is the last question that I have. I think that they made a comment about Michael J. Fox about fixing Parkinson, because he's been this information that you have. I'm sure you have shared it with, groups, foundation, organizations, nonprofit foundations, not-for-profit foundations. Have they embraced it and said, let's go and take our millions and research this even more?
I've sent my paper, my last paper on Lewy body. Lewy bodies are always present in Parkinson's. So Lewy bodies is part of the microscopic fabric of what Parkinson's is. But Lewy bodies in an area on the top of the brain and the cortex can be very important in identifying the Lewy body dementia. Now, Parkinson's there were clusters of Parkinson's disease after some of the epidemics of influenza, and there were post-encephalitic Parkinson's. If they had a virus, bad virus, and then after the bad virus, they got Parkinson's. They had clusters of Parkinson's patients called post-encephalitic Parkinson's. So infection first, then brain damage, then Parkinson's. And that was a scenario which still plays out. Some Parkinson's are due to exposure to other things, and some Parkinson's are cause unknown. It's interesting that Michael J. Fox had no Parkinson's at some time in his life early. And between the time that he didn't have Parkinson's and the time that he did, he was on a movie set where there was a tick infested. And so the Lyme community said that, it could have been. And I don't know whether it was or not, but I think that it's not impossible that he could have been exposed by that tick bite exposure and then developed Parkinson's later on. So Parkinson's and Lyme, or Parkinson's Lewy body, is an active area of research for me. And I found that the Lewy bodies contain the DNA of the spirochete inside the Lewy body, which is a lesion that happens inside the diseased nerve. So it's a pretty good indicator. The DNA doesn't lie to you. Mm-hmm. Blood tests may lie to you, but DNA doesn't. DNA methods of diagnosis are pretty bulletproof.
Well, I tell you what, this is great information. I am certainly going to spread the good news of the work that you're doing. I'm glad that Dr. Lee Cowden shared the information about spirochetes and quoted your work as well. And so I do hope and pray, and I would love to see if you could find anything in my parents, because I don't know how we would do that, because I know that it was a long time coming, and there could have been something that triggered it. And so with many people, we have been told that this is hereditary, but is it really? Not much of our DNA is.
Well, I think that's maybe unfair if they don't have compelling evidence that in your bloodline, your grandparents and your great-grandparents and then your parents all had a similar illness. If you don't have a bloodline that you can trace from dementia bloodline, it's not fair to scare you and talk about, well, it could be. Off camera, I will give you the secret address to send.
That would be awesome. Awesome.
Right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. MacDonald. You are amazing. Thank you for your information, your research, and standing alone. standing alone. There's so many great doctors that have come into the classroom
Well,
that have stood alone for many years. And then all of a sudden, people join them because they realize that the work is very good. And hopefully this will change lives in the future, if not already.
Semmelweis.
The what?
Why did Semmelweis get in trouble? Dr. Semmelweis.
Wasn't he the hands?
That's right. He was the first one to say that dirty hands transmit disease, and they drummed him out of the business because they didn't like that.
Didn't it
They
take
did
like 20
barehanded.
years? Yeah,
Barehanded, right?
yeah.
And of
yeah.
course, he was right. And there's the ship that can't avoid being rammed by the iceberg, right?
That's right. That's right. But
Semmelweis
now,
was right. Right?
but now that not only are we concerned about washing our hands, now we can't even hug everybody. So
Well,
we've
that's-
gone to that other extreme, you know. So I am so grateful for you. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing. I mean, because this is such a dipping the toe. There's so much more we don't know.
There is.
And I want to encourage all of you to go to Dr. MacDonald's website, go to Alzheimer's borreliosis, I think it's BORRELIOSIS.net. Go there and learn some more and just
Thank
be
you.
your own advocate. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and say goodbye now on the website, on the stream, and we will see you tomorrow. Take care.